All right, get ready because this deep dive is going to take us on quite a ride.
Oh, yeah.
You sent us some info about the Barbary pirates, right?
Yeah.
But we're going way beyond the...
Beyond the Hollywood version?
Yeah, like beyond Johnny Depp.
Okay.
And we're going to dive head first into a part of history that...
doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, often gets kind of left out of the textbooks, the white slave trade.
You're absolutely right. It's a chapter of history that deserves more attention. We're not just talking about a few incidents here and there. It's a massive trade, spanning centuries, impacting millions of lives. It's a story that challenges how we think about slavery, forces us to look at the past with fresh eyes.
What's even crazier is how it all ties into the early days of the U.S. I mean, we've got excerpts here from Colin Heaton's Forgotten History to kind of guide us. So we're going to unearth those moments that make you say, wait, what?
I think what's most striking is this, right? A brand new nation, grappling with its own struggles, a brand new navy. And suddenly, they're caught up in this web of international politics, conflict, and a fight against slavery that...
And it mirrored their own.
Right, mirrored their own in a different context. Absolutely.
So let's set the scene.
Okay.
Most people, when they hear slave trade, what do they think of? What comes to mind?
The Atlantic, right.
Yeah.
The horrific journey of enslaved Africans to the Americas.
Yeah, exactly. But slavery wasn't just an Atlantic thing. It was global, right?
It's absolutely a global issue.
And in North Africa, you had this massive white slave trade going on for centuries.
For centuries.
Driven by, of course, the infamous...
Barbary pirates.
Barbary pirates, yeah.
These weren't just fictional villains. These
Right.
were a powerful force in the Mediterranean.
So we're talking about real-life pirates operating out of places like
Algiers,
Tunis, Tripoli. So what was their MO? I mean, were they just like attacking ships at random? Or was there some method to the madness?
Oh, they were a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
Their strategy was multi-pronged. They raided ships, launched surprise attacks on coastal towns.
Oh, wow.
And took captives, sometimes for ransom, sometimes to sell them into slavery. Think of it as...
Like a whole organized thing.
Yeah. Well-organized, driven by profit, fueled in part by the religious context of the time.
Now, that religious context is, that's something I'm really interested in. You mentioned Islamic law played a role. Can you talk more about that?
Right. Islamic law, at least as it was interpreted at the time, allowed for the enslavement of non-Muslims. This gave a kind of justification for what the Barbary pirates were doing.
It's interesting.
It fit within their religious and cultural norms.
Right. So imagine the scene, okay? It's the early 1800s. Global conflict is brewing with the Napoleonic Wars.
Yeah.
The United States is this brand new nation still trying to find its place.
Still figuring things out.
And there you have this white slave trade thriving in North Africa. And guess what? America gets pulled into the fray.
Enter Thomas Jefferson. President's got a lot on his plate. Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark expedition, tensions with Great Britain.
Yeah, busy guy.
And on top of all that, he's got these Barbary pirates attacking American ships, demanding tribute. This forces him to make a tough choice. How does a young nation, opposed to paying tribute, deal with an adversary like this?
And knowing Jefferson,
Oh, yeah.
I have a feeling he wasn't just going to roll over and pay up.
No.
But didn't the U.S. try that at first? Didn't they try to just pay them off?
They did, just like many European nations, tried to avoid conflict by paying tribute.
Right, like protection money.
Right, exactly. It was common practice. But it rarely worked in the long run.
And in this case, it totally backfired.
You got it.
I mean, Tripoli didn't just want to keep things as they were. They wanted more.
Absolutely. They saw the U.S. as an easy target.
Right, new kid on the block.
A nation they could exploit. Their demands kept increasing, pushing Jefferson to a breaking point.
So he had to make a choice.
He did, and in a bold move, they declared war on the United States in 1801.
Declare war. Seriously. I mean, the U.S. was a new nation, sure, but that's a pretty gutsy move.
Yeah.
I mean, what did they think they could gain by taking on a rising power like the United States?
It was a gamble, definitely a risky one.
Yeah.
And for Jefferson, who hated paying tribute, a real challenge.
Right, it went against everything he stood for.
Remember, the U.S. Navy was brand new.
Oh, yeah. Babies, basically.
They were up against pirates who were experts in naval warfare.
So here's Jefferson. Hates paying tribute, facing a real threat to American ships and citizens. What was his plan? I mean, surely he wasn't just going to sit back and let the Barbary pirates run wild, right?
Well, Jefferson, even though he didn't like war,
Yeah.
he knew he had to do something. So he authorized this really daring land and sea operation.
Wait, hold on. Land and sea. I thought we were talking about pirates. What did that involve?
Think unconventional warfare.
Okay.
A small force led by William Eaton
Okay.
and Marine Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon.
All right.
They were tasked with capturing the city of Derna in Tripoli. Their goal: strike at the heart of the pirates' power. Force them to negotiate.
A small force against a whole city run by pirates. That sounds kind of crazy. What do you mean small force? Like how many people are
I'm
talking?
talking about 8 U.S. Marines.
8.
8 Marines, 500 mercenaries, a mix of Greeks, Arabs,
Wow.
even some Berbers who'd been victims of the slave trade themselves.
Wow.
All united against the pirates.
That's wild. I mean, can you imagine the logistics of that? The different cultures trying to get them all to work together?
Oh, it was a challenge. It really highlights who William Eaton was. He was strong-willed, to say the least,
My bad.
keeping them focused in the desert, no less. Not an easy task.
Oh, I can only imagine. The tension, the challenges, the sheer grit it must have taken to pull that off.
It was something else.
So this ragtag army sets off on this mission. What happens next? Do they actually reach Derna?
They do, against all odds. And the battle that followed, the Battle of Derna in 1805, it was a pivotal moment. Not just in this war, but for the whole history of the U.S. Marine Corps.
You know, this is decades before the Marines became famous for their battles in the World Wars, right?
Right.
Are you saying, is this where their legend begins?
This is it. This is the beginning. Imagine O'Bannon and his Marines,
Yeah.
alongside their Greek allies, they charge into the city under heavy fire.
Oh, wow.
They faced fortified positions, cannons, a much larger enemy force.
What a sight that must have been. A true David and Goliath situation. So, was their goal just to hold the city?
Oh.
Or is there a bigger strategy at play here?
Their objective was ambitious: capture the city,
Okay.
cripple Tripoli's defenses,
Right.
and get a strategic advantage. But remember, this wasn't just about winning the war. It was about taking down the whole system that made the white slave trade possible.
So the stakes are super high. What happened? Were they successful?
The fighting was fierce, but O'Bannon and his men, they fought with incredible courage, determination. They captured the city's cannons, turned them on the defenders, and pushed them back. It was a stunning victory, one that would change a lot of things.
They actually did it. I'm getting chills thinking about it.
Mm.
What happened after the battle? Did Tripoli surrender? Did they come to the negotiating table?
Well, the fall of Derna, it really shook Tripoli. Yusuf Karamanli, the ruler, he realized he'd underestimated the Americans.
Yeah, they weren't messing around.
He gambled and lost.
I bet he was surprised.
He was facing defeat and pressure from other European powers. They were tired of the pirates, too.
Right. So he was cornered.
He was. He had no choice but to negotiate.
So the Americans, this ragtag group, their bold strategy, they brought Tripoli to its knees. What were the terms of the peace treaty? Did it address the slave trade?
The treaty, signed June 10th, 1805 aboard the USS Constitution, that was a turning point. It stopped Tripoli from demanding tribute, got American hostages released, but more importantly, it really hurt the pirates' ability to keep raiding for slaves.
So this wasn't just a military victory. It was a victory for, well, for humanity, right? A step towards ending that whole system of enslavement. What was the impact on the white slave trade in that area? Did it just stop overnight?
Well, the treaty, along with the pressure from Europe, it gradually wore down the pirates. Their reign of terror, it didn't end immediately, but it was definitely weakened.
That's quite a legacy for a small force fighting so far from home. It shows you, even actions that seem small can have huge ripple effects.
They really can.
But their story isn't over, right? What happened to the individuals who fought at Derna?
That's what makes history so interesting.
I know, right?
It's not just dates and battles.
It's the people.
It's about courage, resilience, the human spirit overcoming incredible odds.
Exactly. We've talked about the big picture, the politics, the fighting, but I'm curious about the people who are at the center of it all. What can you tell us about them?
Well, let's start with Presley O'Bannon, the Marine lieutenant.
Yeah.
He led the charge at Derna. He became a legend in the Corps, a symbol of their daring spirit.
He's the one who raised the American flag on foreign soil for the first time, right?
That's him. It must have been an incredible feeling after such a hard-fought battle.
Yeah, what happened to him after the war?
He came home a hero, continued serving in the Marines.
Okay.
But his later years, well, they were tough. He struggled with personal problems, financial hardship.
Oh, wow.
It's a reminder that even heroes face their own battles, even after the war is over.
That's a really good point. History isn't just about big victories.
Right.
It's about human stories, struggles, triumphs, tragedies.
Exactly. It's about the whole picture.
Were there others whose stories stand out?
Oh, absolutely. There's another Marine. His story's remarkable. John Trippe. He was just a teenager when he fought at Derna.
A teenager. Wow, that's incredibly young. What was his role in the battle?
His story shows the courage, the resilience of youth. He was in charge of a small group of Marines defending a key position.
Wow. So this teenager,
Yeah.
in charge of other Marines, facing off against these pirates, must have been intense. What happened to him during the fight?
Picture this. Trippe and his men, they're surrounded.
Oh, no.
Outnumbered.
Wow.
A desperate situation. But he doesn't surrender. He rallies his men,
Wow.
fights back fiercely,
No way.
and against all odds,
Yeah.
they hold their position.
He sounds like a true hero, inspiring his men to keep fighting. Did his actions have a big impact on the battle?
Absolutely. Their defense was vital. They bought precious time for the main force, helped secure the American victory.
Wow.
But-
Trippe's story shows us that even when things seem impossible, courage and determination can win the day.
That's the heart of it.
It's inspiring to hear about these everyday people who step up, show incredible bravery, fighting for freedom, for themselves and others.
It really highlights something important. History's full of these unsung heroes
I agree.
whose actions, even if they're not in the history books, shaped the course of events. Their stories need to be told, their sacrifices remembered.
It makes you wonder about all the other stories that are out there. Countless people who played a part in this fight against the pirates, the slave trade. But we've been focusing a lot on the American side of things. What about the victims of the white slave trade? What were their experiences like?
Their stories, a lot of them lost to time. They're key to understanding the real impact of this whole thing. Imagine being taken from your home, your family, everything you know,
I can't even imagine.
and forced into slavery in a strange land.
It's heartbreaking to even think about. What were the conditions like for them? Are there any accounts of what they went through?
It was brutal. Cramped ships, disease everywhere, constant threat of violence, not knowing what was going to happen next.
Oh, gosh.
Some were put to hard labor, others suffered unimaginable cruelty, abuse. Their stories, even though we only have fragments, they paint a very dark picture of the human cost.
It reminds us that the fight for freedom, basic human dignity, it's a constant struggle throughout history. The victory over the Barbary pirates, that was a big step, but it wasn't the end.
Absolutely not. The fight against slavery in all its forms, it carried on long after the Barbary Wars.
And it's a fight that, in a lot of ways, continues today.
It does.
That brings us back to our original question.
Right.
What about the rest of the world? What happened to slavery in other places after the Barbary Wars?
The Barbary Wars, they were a turning point, no doubt, but the fight against slavery worldwide, that was far from over. Even as the Barbary pirates were losing their grip, the transatlantic slave trade, that was still going strong for decades. It's a reminder that money, profit, it often comes before basic human decency.
It really makes you think, right?
Yeah.
One form of slavery is being challenged, but others are carrying on.
Yeah.
Fueled by these deep-rooted systems, economic and social.
Absolutely. It was a long process.
Yeah.
A mix of moral arguments, economic pressures, political action. Abolitionist movements, they were gaining momentum, pointing out how wrong slavery was at its core. But then you also had economic shifts, the rise of industry, which made slavery less profitable in some areas.
So it wasn't just people suddenly realizing slavery was wrong. It was all these things coming together.
Exactly. A perfect storm, in a way.
That finally tipped the scales. But even after the transatlantic slave trade was abolished, slavery itself, that didn't just disappear overnight.
No, not at all. The United States, for example, they struggled with it for decades. It took a civil war, a bloody one, to finally abolish it, to get that principle of freedom for all in the Constitution.
It shows you that progress isn't always straightforward. You know, even in countries that are supposed to be about liberty, that fight for equality, it can be a long, hard road.
It definitely can.
What about other parts of the world? Was the fight against slavery happening at the same time elsewhere?
It was a global movement. You had uprisings, movements happening across continents. Latin America, for instance, their independence movements, they often went hand in hand with the fight to end slavery. And in Europe, countries that had gotten rich off the slave trade, they were starting to confront what they'd done.
So there was a shift happening globally, right? People were starting to see how unjust slavery was.
It was a growing realization, but it wasn't a smooth process, not at all.
Right. There were probably different ways of going about it.
Absolutely. Different approaches to abolition, different motives. The abolitionist movement, it was a real mix of people, perspectives, strategies. Some wanted gradual emancipation. Others wanted immediate, unconditional freedom.
Yeah.
You had religious beliefs, economic arguments, humanist ideals, all shaping the movement.
It's amazing how all these different ideas came together, eventually becoming this force for change.
A powerful force.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are some of the big takeaways we want our listener to think about? What have we learned from this journey into this hidden part of history?
Well, I think one thing that really stands out is this. We need to question simple narratives. History, it's complicated, messy, full of contradictions and unexpected links. The Barbary Wars, for example, they turn our usual understanding of slavery upside down.
Yeah, it's not the story you typically hear.
It makes us see its global reach, the different experiences of the people who were enslaved.
It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles.
Right.
It's about people, their stories, the impact they have.
And how those stories can challenge what we think we know about the past.
Another thing that's important to remember is that progress is possible.
It is.
Even if it's slow and bumpy.
Absolutely. The fight against slavery, it might not be over.
Yeah.
But it shows us what people can achieve when they work together, the power of the human spirit.
It's a testament to those who fought for freedom.
Yes.
Often against all odds. Their stories show us that even in the darkest times, hope, the pursuit of justice, they can win out.
And one last thought. This deep dive, I think it underscores the importance of always learning, always exploring. History is full of hidden connections, stories waiting to be told, perspectives that make us question everything.
It's like an invitation to dig deeper, question the stories we've been told, uncover the richness and complexity of what came before.
So to our listener who's been with us through the Barbary Wars, the fight against slavery, we encourage you, keep exploring. Learn about the lives of those who were enslaved.
Yeah.
Examine the abolitionist movement from all angles. And think about how these events from the past are still shaping our world today.
It's a journey of discovery, connecting with history in a way that matters, understanding the forces that have led us to where we are now. And who knows, maybe it'll inspire you to start your own deep dive into the amazing tapestry of history.